This week on Obsessed with Wine.
We'll have a number of reds, a number of whites, and to the best of our abilities, we're going to do some deductive reasoning and try to figure out, hey, where is this grape coming from? What is the grape? Who made it? What year is it? And finally, what is this wine in front of me?
Hello, fellow wine enthusiasts. My name is Wesley Cable. Welcome to episode number 7 of Obsessed with Wine. Robert Sinskey Vineyards is in the Stag's Leap district, right off the famous Silverado Trail in Napa. In the late 70s, Dr. Robert Sinskey set out on a journey to find the perfect land to grow Pinot Noir. His search brought him to the Napa side of Carneros, where he initially purchased a small 15-acre farm. Not making wine at that point, Dr. Sinskey sold his grapes to another winery and continued to purchase additional land for farming. By 1985, Dr. Robert Sinskey had a total of 115 acres in production. It was during that time that one of Dr. Sinskey's inventions, an artificial lens used to revolutionize cataract surgery, really took off, so retirement was put on hold. Unfortunately, the winery he was selling his grapes to ran into some trouble and was eventually sold. Without a winery to sell his grapes, Dr. Sinskey decided to hire a winemaker and start making his own wine. Robert Sinskey Vineyards opened its winery in 1988. Dr. Sinskey continued to oversee his vineyards, winery, and highly successful medical practice until 1996, when he turned operations of the wine business over to his son, Rob Sinskey. Rob continues to oversee operations at Robert Sinskey today, where they farm 200 acres of 100% organic and biodynamic certified premium vineyards and make some of the best Pinot Noir in the valley. In this episode, I sit down with Jame Blackmon, Wine Informant with Robert Sinskey Vineyards. In this interview, Jame and I talk about his journey to becoming a sommelier, what it's like working for Rob Sinskey, and we talk about a white wine blend called Abraxas that is totally different than anything currently being done in Napa. Grab a glass of your favorite wine. It's time for Obsessed with Wine. Tonight's special guest for the Obsessed with Wine podcast is Jame Blackmon. Jame is a wine informant at Robert Sinskey Vineyards in Napa. Jame, welcome to the show. I appreciate you joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I want to start with a little story that I have about my first visit to Robert Sinskey. So when I worked in Napa, I would take the Silverado Trail to and from work. I was staying at a place in downtown Napa, and I would pass Robert Sinskey Vineyards every single day, and I would look at it every single day, and I was intrigued with just how the winery looked. It didn't look like other wineries that I've seen in Napa, and so it was really intriguing to me. One day, I just decided, you know what, I'm going to go in there for a visit. Now, granted, I had no appointment. I was wearing my dirty cellar worker clothes at the time. So I wasn't looking that great, right? And so I went in there and I had the best time. The gentleman who helped me, and I don't remember his name, he was gracious about his time. We tried some awesome wines. I think I walked out with an Abraxas and a Pinot Noir, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You know, he told me the story about a vineyard that was at the winery that not too long ago had been burned by some fires, and that they wouldn't be able to produce wine from that vineyard any longer. And I don't remember what that was. So what vineyard was that? When was that?
So that would be the 2017 fires. We'll get into this story a little more, but our tasting room where we do our press, where we do our fermentation, our bottling, everything is located in Stag's Leap, while a majority, if not all of our wine is located in Los Carneros, which gives us a unique take already to our wine. That property in Stag's Leap is what burned, unfortunately.
And what grape was it that burned? Was it Cab?
Yeah, so we have our Cab Sav on the hillside, and then Merlot down in the basin. So all of that burned, unfortunately.
So now it was replanted, I guess, and now you just have to wait for it to be able to produce again, to be able to produce wine in that area again.
It is the waiting game. Yeah, sadly, grapes do take a little bit to reach a maturable point where we can make wine from it. You know, always being thankful in the little things, right? Our building was saved, and, you know, not 3-4 minutes down the road, you have Signorellios who they're still to this day rebuilding their tasting room because it was burned to the ground. So, vines, it's always a sad time when fires come through and destroy, but, always thankful that it wasn't as bad as it could have been.
Yeah, definitely. So that means the Cabernet, you guys can't produce Cabernet until those vines are ready, or do you get Cabernet elsewhere?
Yeah, so we have some cab planted in Cardeneras as well. Our wine coming from the Stagley district, we call it SLD. That's where our cab is coming from. So we have, a 2017 vintage. We did harvest that before the fires started, but a small production of it. So
That is sad. You hate to hear that. So, all right. So let's talk a little bit about you now first, Jame. So
yeah,
you're from Alabama, right?
I am.
Okay. And you went to college in Alabama at Auburn University, a big college in
I did.
Alabama. So I always like to ask first, is there a wine country in Alabama? Is there wine being grown or made in Alabama at all?
Yeah, so there's actually wine being made in every state, but I'm quick to tell people it doesn't mean that it's great wine, right?
Okay. Yeah.
I don't know the last time I opened up a bottle of wine from Idaho, but yeah, there is wine being done in Alabama. When you look at the Southeast as a region, primarily you're seeing things like muscadine coming out of it. People's minds immediately go to sweet when they think of that, and for good reason. A lot of it is sweet, probably for the best because I haven't had the greatest wine coming out of there, but they're growing grapes.
Okay. Excellent. So did you have an appreciation for wine when you when you lived in Alabama? Is that kind of where your appreciation for wine came from, or where did that come from?
Yeah, so I got fascinated with wine at an earlier age for the agriculture side of it, right? Myself, I was adopted. I was born in Thailand. I'm Thai Samoan. That's my heritage. But my family originates from Texas, right? So on my dad's side, we had business in the agriculture side of fruits and veggies, right? My grandfather worked with Chiquita Fruits, but we also had a stake in the livestock side as far as Texas Angus goes. So I kind of had these little seeds of agriculture planted just in conversations with my grandfather. And when I started looking into wine, I was just astounded that something from such a humble beginning could be pushed up into such a pretentious, a lot of times, state, right?
Hmm.
No other form of agriculture that we have is elevated to this level, right? I ask people, when was the last time you went to an orange farm, right? When was the last time you went to a corn field, right,
Never.
and tasted some local corn, right? No, it's wine has just been elevated to this place, and my love as a som has always been connecting people not just with the liquid inside that bottle, but with the family that produced it. And so I guess that's really where my heart came from.
So you mentioned the Somm certificate. So you've got some certifications already. Just real quick for people who don't know the process of becoming a sommelier, what does that look like? What is the program, and how long does it take?
Man, it's hard. We'll start off with that. There's three, I would say, that are our main certifications right now. The Master Court of Sommeliers has been around for a while. Traditionally, that's what people think of when they think of sommeliers. And then we came into the WSET, right? WSET is probably the more popular one nowadays. And then we have the Wine Educator Society, which offers the CWE and the CSW. And so that is gaining traction too. As far as SOMs go, I did my advanced with the Master Court, and I had my level 3 with the WSET. My Master Court was the hardest, in my opinion. There's 4 levels, so we start off with an introductory course. Then we go up to a certified sommelier. Then you have your advanced, and then you have your master. If any of you guys listening saw a documentary on Netflix called Somm,
I
or
did.
Somm into the Bottle, right? We're talking about the master court there. We had advanced sommeliers studying to take their master test. And when you're talking about your advanced test and your master, those are both tests that you have to be invited for. You can't just sign up on a Google Doc. So usually we're looking at 3 parts of this test. The first one, theory, anything and everything, from regions to varietals to processes. And then we go into something known as tasting, right? Blind tasting. We'll have a number of reds, a number of whites. And to the best of our abilities, we're going to do some deductive reasoning and try to figure out, hey, where is this grape coming from? What is the grape? Who made it? What year is it? and finally, what is this wine in front of me? So that is a stumper for a lot of people. And then
Yeah.
the last, at least in the master court, would be service. A lot of times somms, just to pass your test, you have to be kind of an obsessive person, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to obsess over wine, and what a great podcast to talk about
Right.
obsession.
Yeah.
But
Sounds like me. Yeah.
yeah, you really have to dive in and be book smart. But book smart is not everything. We have to not only be book smart, but we have to be able to, one, be able to professionally serve. Two, a more important one for me is we have to be able to convey that information in a palatable way to people, and people who may not have the same background and knowledge as you. I've met many smart people and many smart people in wine, but I've seen a lot of people fail to be able to convey to the average person these processes in wine, right? And we get them a lot in the tasting room, right? I have people who come in who it might be their first wine tasting ever, or they're just newly getting into wine. Those are not the people that we need to start arguing about pitch mallow versus normal mallow, or carbonic maceration, or steel versus cement, right? Like, they don't care. They don't need to know the Brix level of our grapes. At the simplest point, it's all about, do you like this wine or not, right? And
Yeah.
if you do, we can talk about it more. And if you don't, let's move on. So in broad strokes, that is what we're looking at when we're going into our sommelier exams.
So when is your final exam then that you were just talking about? The one that I see on the documentary, like you mentioned, those guys. I mean, gosh, they study so hard and for so long, and they're so good at what they do, yet they're so nervous about taking that final test. So what does that look like for you?
Man, I'll tell you, I am completely satisfied in my stake in life right now.
Okay.
I
Okay.
have several people who have pushed me to study for it and attempt it, right? Attempt is a word I like to use because some of these guys are 3-4 times way smarter than I am, right? And it took them multiple times to pass this test. And so for me, I'm satisfied in my knowledge and what I've obtained, and honestly, just to have a little humility, I don't know how long it would take me to pass that test. They get harder and harder each time, and advanced is hard enough, but there's a reason there's only 250, 300 masters in the world. It's a hard test.
Just think you could be one of those 300. That'd be pretty awesome, right?
I could, right? I could.
So the other thing you mentioned, though, is the WSET. Is that what you call it? WSET? What do they call it? WSET?
Yeah, WSET, right? You have 4 levels of that too.
Okay, you're level 3.
Yes, it would be comparable to your advanced, right?
So for somebody like me, right, I have a winemaking certificate from UC Davis, but I don't have anything other than that. And I worked in some wineries and that kind of stuff. And I study on my own and I read and all that. So do you have to start at level 1 and graduate to a level 3? Is that how it works?
Yeah, you do. There is a progression to it. For you with a background in wine, I'm sure you could breeze through your 2 and not have to study too much. But for your average person who may know nothing about wine and wants to obtain this, you're gonna have to study for level 1. There's definitely a curve and base knowledge that you need to know about wine. And wine's always changing. Every year we have a new vintage, right? And not just us, every winery in the world does. And so it's a continual learning process, and it's something that you'll never reach the peak of, right? Even the masters have to learn every single year. And so that's the thrill of it for some people, of almost this unattainable knowledge, right? You're always learning. I know a lot of people who are in the wine industry who sit for their WSET 1 or their introductory somm, just to broaden their horizons and get a little more foundation under them. But I will say this too, it's not needed. It is an incredible way to brag in front of other winos. But at the end of the day, I've always said that passion is kind of like butter. It covers over a lot of mistakes, right? And something that I loved about Sinskey is that, your certifications aren't the end-all be-all, right? We have several people there who have no certifications at all, but they're passionate. They're passionate about wine. They're passionate about people. They're passionate about connecting people to wine. And again, at the end of the day, it's about being able to make that connection, right? All the knowledge in the world isn't helpful if you can't convey that to another human being.
Yeah. So one more question on that, just because it is something I've been fascinated with. For the W set, right? Let's say I studied and I got my W set 3 certification. What does that do for me, if anything, other than me enjoying going through the process and knowing that I took this hard test and I passed and I have this knowledge and I'm excited about it? Does it do anything for me professionally if I want to work in wine at all?
Yeah, professionally, it opens a lot of doors, right? If you have that, we'll just use the master pen because it is the highest. If you have a master som pen, not only do you have an entryway into any restaurant, any winery, any program that you want to be a part of, but you have access now to funding and credibility, right? If you want to start your own business, if you want to start your own program, whatever it might be, it is equivalent, right, of a diploma, right? We're not talking about a 4-year institution here, right? It's a lot of self-study. The years depend on how smart you are as a person, right? Some people can just devote their entire livelihood to it and study and study every single day and take it sooner than others. It might be a 1-year process for you. It might be a 10-year process. It just depends on your personal intellect and how you absorb information. But the same discussion we've seen with college degrees, right? At the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. You know, I know a lot of smart people without college degrees, and I know a lot of people who are smart with college degrees. But if you want that CFO job, if you want that CEO job, if you want that chairman of the board, whatever it might be, having that piece of paper that says I have a master's in business or in finance gets you in the door.
It makes a difference. Yeah. So how did you get to Napa then? So let's go back to that. So you're in Alabama, you went to school, you finished school. How did you end up in Napa?
Yeah, so man, my life has been a crazy whirlwind. I've done a lot of stuff in my short time. So I was raised in a town called Huntsville, Alabama. Most people would know it for NASA. We got a lot of stuff going in Huntsville. Most PhDs per capita in the world. We've been the number one tech city for a long time. And so all that to say, not what most people think of, especially over on the West Coast when they think of Alabama, not trailer parks, just a lot of PhDs, rocket scientists, and engineers, right?
Wow, yeah.
So I grew up there, went to Auburn University, studying hospitality and business. Auburn has a great partnership with the Master Chord and with the Wine Education Society. And so I was introduced to wine there and thankful that they paid for me to get introed into wine. For me, it was a win-win. I either get to drink free wine or I get to drink free wine and maybe get some certification out of it. So I just
Pretty
have to
cool.
get both. But yeah, I was there in and out of it. I have a lot of little aspects of my life. I've been racing cars for a while now, semi-talented at it. Been doing stunt work in the film industry alongside that. But I was like, hey, I got to figure out what I'm going to do with my life. And some of my mentors advised me about pushing into wine and taking that more seriously and pursuing it as a career. And so there's a guy named Hans van der Rijden, which shout out to Hans. I wouldn't be here without him. Worked with a guy named Hort Schulze for a very long time. Hort Schulze, the founder and CEO of Ritz-Carlton. Hans knows me well, and I sat down with him. I said, Hans, what should I do with my life? Where do I need to go? And he said, hey, I'll send you to 2 places. One, Fisher Vineyards, Robert Fisher, the head of that, or Robert Sinskey. I said, all right, 2 Roberts. Also, I found in the wine world, if your name is Robert, you have a much higher likelihood of getting into wine than anybody else,
A
right?
lot of famous Roberts,
Um,
yeah.
a lot of famous Roberts. So I did some research. I came back to him and I said, hey, you know what? Robert Sinskey looks like the place for me. And so he connected with me. I got in contact with them, and the rest is history. I moved out here July or June of 2021. So a COVID move, and I haven't looked
Hmm.
back. It's been great ever since. So
Well, let's talk about Robert Sinskey Vineyards then.
yeah,
It's a pretty fascinating story, and people who listen to the podcast probably hear me say this all the time. One of the things that I'm really into when it comes to wine is the stories and about the wine and the vineyards and the wineries. So, what can you tell me about how the winery got started, when it got started, and kind of how things all came about?
so our namesake, Robert Sinskey, Dr. Robert Sinskey, he was an ophthalmologist. We would highly regard him as a pioneer in cataract surgery. Did a lot of amazing work when it came to advancements in that world. And in his retirement, he decided to get into agriculture, right? Now, I want to start off by saying this. A lot of wineries that you see coming up through Napa have been started by doctors or successful businessmen. And there are a lot of them that were started as a tax break, right? Or just to
Oh,
have your
sure.
name on a winery, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like, hey, we're going to get into this and we're going to step away, and they don't care what happens with it. But from day one, Robert Sinskey was intentional about farming, specifically organic and biodynamic farming. He had a vision that Pinot Noir would be the grape of the future, that the American diet would follow suit to our European brothers and sisters. We'd see more seasonal eating. We'd see these lighter meals, more fish introduced in the diet. And so he thought Pinot Noir was just going to be the grape to carry us into the future. And you know what? It's taken a little while, but we are seeing Americans care about what they're eating. We're seeing this
Sure.
push toward organics and sustainability. And so our conception was agriculture, right? Dr. Sinskey had no interest in making wine. Opening a winery is not really retiring. It's kind of like starting a new business. And
Yeah.
I think he was just happy farming. And so we did that for about 5 years. We were selling grapes. Our main buyer was Acacia, and that winery went bankrupt. They got bought out, and those new owners really didn't care about organics or biodynamics or intentional farming. And so that is how we got that Stag's Leap property, right? We got that property as essentially an IOU to a contract failure. And Dr. Sinskey was left with a choice, right? I have all these grapes and no one's buying them, so I either need to start making some wine or I need to invest in a bigger garbage disposal, right? So
Right. Yeah.
wine it was. His son, Rob Jr., joined in 86. Rob originally went to Parsons School of Design, right? He wanted to be a photojournalist, and he was a talented one at that, but man, fell in love with Napa and what was going on there, and gave up a life to go up there and join in Dad with his mission. Rob Jr.'s wife, Maria Sinskey, no small name there. She was 1996 Food and Wine's top chef. She was the executive chef and the Plumpjack Group in Northern California. The reason they have their Michelin star, did training throughout Denmark, worked throughout France, being in multiple Michelin star restaurants. And she drives our culinary force at Sinskey. And then our last piece of our puzzle is a guy named Jeff Vernig. Went to Cal Poly, joined us in 88 as the assistant winemaker. In 91, we made him the head winemaker at the age of 26, and he's been our only winemaker at Sinskey. And so, man, those three, alongside Dr. Sinskey, are the foundation of Robert Sinskey Vineyards, and they've been there ever since, right? I think that's something that's special about Sinskey is, I have people who tell me they haven't been back since 95 or 2002 or whatever it might be. And, I tell them, hey, the building might have changed. We've done some renovations, but everything as far as the wine, the people is the same, right?
Yeah.
We're small family owned. We're still small family owned, and we're still doing the same thing that you love. So,
Well, there was one thing I read about Rob, the son, that I thought was fascinating and kind of resonated with me in my own life, is he had all these other options, to do, like you mentioned, photography or photojournalism. And he got involved in his dad's business in this wine, and it's just been this obsession for him for the last 30 years. And so it parallels a little bit with my story, obviously not to the same level, but, discovering wine later in life. And it's just been this obsession for me ever since, I've got involved in it. So it's a really interesting story. So when you look at the wines, tell me about kind of the winemaking style. And if somebody said, what's Robert Sinskey's wine all about? Tell me what that's all about.
Kind of going back to what we started with, it starts with agriculture, right? And our wine is a reflection of our land. But not only that, but for us, it's a responsibility to leave our land better than we found it. Biodynamic, it's a big word. It can be broken down a lot of different ways. But for me, it's this understanding that nature has this balance. And that any human interaction with it is going to disrupt that balance. So for us, it's how can we disrupt this as little as possible? How can we work with nature more than we're working against nature? And, Jeff is amazing. I don't want to downplay that at all, but I always use the example of culinary, right? If we, take the most amazing chef you've ever had a meal from and give him the cheapest steak that you can find, there's only so much he can do with it, right? There's only so much. He can't change how that cow was treated, what it ate, how it lived. He can just do with what he's given, right? But if you take a really amazing chef and you give him, A5 Wagyu beef, you give him something that's been loved, that's been cared for, that's been given the best food possible, you get something really beautiful out of it. So it's not just Jeff on his side, but our viticulturist, Carrie Flores, and her nurturing and her care in the vineyard, right? Those grapes spend a lot more time in the vineyard than they do with Jeff in the back. And so it's this marriage of both, right? You need both. And so that's why I always steer it back to agriculture. It all starts in the fields, right? Agriculture is at the root of all that.
So for you, you work in the tasting room, I'm guessing, right? Is that your position? Yeah. Okay. Do you get to experience any of those other things, working in the vineyard or working in the cellar, anything like that?
Yeah, so, we have a harvest crew, about 15 people that work in the field. So not so much field work, but everything that happens in the building, we all kind of have a hand on, right? Like I said, we're a small family company. I think there's 16, 17 of us that work there right now. That's including the owners, right?
Yeah.
Everything from helping with crush to bottling to, moving pallets around in the back, rearranging, cleaning, refurnishing. We do it all. It's fun. It's fun, and it's exactly where I would want to be. And there's nothing wrong with bigger wineries, but I always say that we're diverse for a reason, and that if everybody was doing the same thing, then it'd make Napa very boring. And so, no hate at all to bigger wineries, but man, it's been such a pleasure working at a place that, man, I can fist bump Jeff every morning, right? And I'm having this connection with the winemakers, with the owners, with Maria in the back in the kitchen, and having a little bit more of a family, personal connection with the wine.
That sounds like a really cool environment. So let's go back to Rob a little bit. So what is he like? I don't know how old he is, but what is he like now? Is he there every day? And, what is his input right now in how things run at the winery?
Dr. Sinskey passed away in 2016, but like I said at the beginning, Rob has been driving this force since the beginning, right? I never wanted to sound like he had one hand in this world and one hand in the other world. And he's been dedicated to this from the very beginning. And so Rob, Maria, and Jeff, like I said, they run this place. Like, nothing happens without them knowing it. And they're integral in this part. During COVID, we were traveling less, so everybody was kind of at home base. But now that hopefully, fingers crossed, we're starting to see, a new dawn. We're starting to be on the road more, right? When you come into Sinskey, you'll see a big chalkboard that says, "Catch us on the road." So we are in from Houston, Dallas, New York, Atlanta. We're touring around, trying to say hi to people, get some wine and food into people's bodies, and shake some hands. So Rob, Maria, our general manager, Phil, not all the time, but any given weekend we'll be different city, introducing ourselves to people and trying to see some old faces that we haven't seen in a while.
So do you get to go on some of those trips? I guess they're sales trips or something, where you guys go out and introduce wine to people who haven't heard of the wines before?
Yes and no. A lot of our trips of recent have just been a lot of members who haven't been able to get to travel, in the past 2 years. I think our Atlanta dinner was pretty much all members, right? And seeing old faces, like I said. So
wow.
For me, I do travel a little bit more so on personal reasons, and I get to meet up with some people and get to share a wine. But for the most part, Phil, Rob, and Maria are spear pointing that endeavor. But who better, right?
They're the right people. That's right. So one thing I noticed about the Robert Sinskey team is everybody has this really cool title. It's not just wine educator or, things like that. So where does that come from? Who came up with that kind of stuff, if you know?
You know what? It's a way just to keep things fun. We've always been kind of mavericks in the wine world, right? We, in more ways than one, but it's a way to not take ourselves too seriously, right? We've talked about me. I have these certs. That's not the first thing I tell people. It's rarely something I mention to begin with. And so everybody kind of has a little nickname that speaks to them and who they are. When you join up with Sinskey, it's kind of a rite of passage that we're all brainstorming these nicknames for when your business cards come in, right?
That's pretty cool. So you've got Wine Informant. And I remember when I first saw that, I was thinking, Wine Informant, is that the same thing as like a wine educator? And I asked you and you said, yeah, that's what it is. But then I noticed everyone's kind of got a little fancy title, which is really cool, actually.
For me, my title is Renaissance Man.
Oh,
We have Justin who works there. He streams a lot of video games in his off time, so his nickname is Player One. A whole lot of those things, just fun things that identify us as people and not just names and certificates, right?
so let's talk about some of the wines. Okay.
Yeah.
I've got some here I want to talk about, and who better to talk to about them than you? So I got a question for you though, because this is something I talk about all the time in these wine groups that I belong to, is everyone has their thoughts on what's the right brand of wine glass to use for their wine, right? So my question to you, and I'm not expecting you to go through all that, but what do you guys use in the tasting room? And the reason I ask that is because as a consumer and somebody who really appreciates wine, the glass matters to me. So when I go to a tasting room, if they have nice glasses, that's important to me. So I just thought I would throw that out there and ask you. So what do you guys use? And as somebody who's trained in this, does it matter?
We use Rydell's, which is a solid glass. I want to answer this so many ways. Like yes and no. Like glassware does matter. There's some cheap, bad glassware out there, right? If you're
Mm-hmm.
drinking champagne from a Bordeaux glass, like maybe or if we're drinking Cab Sav from a champagne flute, right? There's glass for certain reasons. So the answer is yes and no. Yes, if you are drinking Cab Sav out of a champagne flute, talk to me. We'll get you some better glassware. But to get caught up in brand names of glass, and I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to consistency and craftsmanship, right? Why do we
Mm-hmm.
use the glass that we use? Well, it's good glass. It doesn't break
Mm-hmm.
often. It has a lineage of quality. But to say that our wine is going to taste, drastically different, right, out of this glass than another, I'd probably laugh that off.
Now, how about plastic cups? You ever go with the plastic cup on your wine?
You know what? I've been known to be at a grill out and have some Pinot Blanc in a red Solo cup.
Okay. All right.
It works, right? Formal tasting, yeah, definitely not. But I've always said that wine, just like food, has connected us and is a connector for us to places and memories, right? When you were at Sinskey all those years ago, you don't necessarily remember what wine you had, the tasting notes of that wine, but you remember the environment, you remember the people, you remember the
Sure.
memories that were associated with that. And so,
That's right.
there's a time and place for everything. In a formal tasting, if we're doing some deductive tasting, trying to do some blind tasting and figure out what wine is, then there's certain tools we need for that. But at the end of the day, if I'm enjoying good wine with friends and family, then it doesn't really matter what I'm drinking it out of because my memory is going to be associated with something else anyway.
So let's go into some wines here. The first one, and I hope I'm saying this right, it's Vin Gris of Pinot Noir. Is that a rosé type wine?
It
So tell
is.
me about that.
Yeah, so Vin Gris Pinot Noir, a wine that has become a hard wine to get a hold of. It's become kind of legendary in its own right. Our rosé is being done in the Bandel style of France. So Domaine Tempure would be the best example I can give of that.
What is that style? What does it mean?
Yeah, dry rosé. If you ask Jeff, he'll say, I don't really care what the color is. I just want it to taste good and to be a representation of our terroir. So this year's, we released it actually last Thursday now, selling like hotcakes. And this year, a little bit bigger of a body, really digging into like peach and nectarine and your stone fruits. And just a really beautiful example of a Pinot Noir done in the New World. So, but yeah, Vin Gris of Pinot Noir is what we would call it.
So for you, since you are trained in this kind of thing, and I know I keep going back to this, but what would be a good pairing for that particular wine?
Man, a lot of things. Personally, I could go into some. I'm just hungry right now at this point. We go into like a stuffed branzino, right? Put a branzino on a grill. We could go into maybe some dishes that we don't want to jump into a red, but we would want a white to have a little bit more body in. So let's think of like drunken clams, right? Let's think of a mussel linguine, right? The options are really endless when it comes to that. And as far as our wines go, a lot of the wines are like that. There's a lot of wines that people are like, what would I eat with this? And we're like, man, there's a long list. right? Depends on what you like.
Right. So the next wine I want to ask you about is Abraxas. And when I talk to people, about Robert Sinskey, one of the things they say is, "Oh, you got to ask him about Abraxas. I love Abraxas." And I remember when I was there, I bought a bottle of that and I enjoyed that. So it's a unique wine, and I think that's really cool. So tell us about Abraxas.
Yeah, it's a super unique wine. So Abraxas, we started doing it in 2003. Up until that point, we were doing Chardonnay. But we were doing this very French-inspired Chardonnay, right? No oak, very little mallow, a bright, crisp Chardonnay. But you look in the 80s and 90s, and that's really not what people were drinking, right? We're still on this heavy malolactic fermentation, heavy oak Chardonnay train. So we kind of switched our gaze, and we started looking toward Alsace. Northern France, right there at the border of Germany and France. They've had their own beaten and battered past, just due to occupation wars. But the area is just such a beautiful melting pot of German and French culture. And Abraxas is a reflection of that, right? Any given year, the percentages are going to change, but we have Pinot Blanc, Riesling, Pinot Gris, and Gewürztraminer all paired together in that wine, right? Our Riesling, our Mosel clones coming over from Germany, mixed so beautifully with these Alsatian grapes. And so Abraxas currently is the only Alsatian blend being done in Napa. And, if any of your listeners know of another one in Napa, feel free to correct me. But as we know right now, we're the only people dipping into this. So it is a unique wine for the Valley. It's a nice little break from the Chardonnay and Sauv Blanc of especially Northern Napa, right? And not that anything are wrong with those grapes, but taste breaks are always welcome. Abraxas is such an incredibly complex wine because of those four grapes. On the nose, it's extremely aromatic, perfumey, right? For me, it's Gewürztraminer always gives me this honeysuckle floral perfume. And so for a lot of people, when they smell Abraxas, they have, and once they figure out there's Riesling and Gewürztraminer in it, they have this mindset that it's going to be a sweet wine, right? There's going to be some residual sugar left in there. But man, once you get that on the palate, it's bone dry. It's a bone dry wine. And so it gets people scratching their heads a little bit. When it's cooler, it pushes more into that fruit forward floral note, right? But as it warms up, you start to get more of like a white pepper, this bay leaf, this savory note coming on the bottom end. So because of that, we talk about endless pairing opportunities. This is it, right? I love food, so I love talking about pairings. Abraxas, any dish you would lean into lemon and lime aspects of it, perfect starting place. So, the Northeast, think of your blue crab, your lobster rolls. Going down to the Southeast where I'm from, it'd be killer with a crawfish boil, right? That acid in there cuts fat really well. It really dissipates heat. Being Thai Samoan, Pad Thai is close to my heart. Abraxas and Pad Thai, you got to try it. It's killer.
Okay.
And then all of your Hispanic foods, right? Your fajitas, your cochinita, go into ceviche, oysters. All these dishes I'm mentioning have usually lemon or lime wedges served on the side of it. And so Abraxas kind of fills that same space. But even in that, like I said, as it warms up, as the wine warms up, it gets more into a savory note. And so you can go into your braised lamb. You can go into a seared duck breast. I mean, I'm not saying it goes with everything, but
endless possibilities, though.
Endless possibilities, absolutely.
So how much of that wine do you make? Do you know how many cases is produced every year?
Case-wise, I don't know off the top of my head. I know it's our highest selling white. So to the point where, when we started, most people thought of Pinot Noir when they thought of Robert Sinskey. But now, within the industry at least, a lot of people think of Abraxas when they think of Robert Sinskey. So,
well, for good reason, because it's a terrific wine and it's different, which I really like, and it's got an interesting story, so I think it's really cool. So let's go on to the next wine then. This wine is called Orgia. Am I saying that right?
Yeah. So I would say Orgia, right?
Orgia, okay.
You can say
excuse me for not knowing, but
oh, you're fine. Orgia would be a cute little town in Italy where Rob and Maria spent some time. Orgia would be orgy in Italian. Which
I
is
see.
Equally funny, right?
No wonder you look at me weird for saying that.
It happens more times than not. Well, if you look at the front of the bottle, you can tell that we don't mind people making that mistake. The front of the Orgeat bottle, for those of you who can't see it, it has little perforations in it. It mimics the old LSD acid tabs
Oh,
of the
interesting.
60s, right?
Okay,
And
yeah.
so the conception of that kind of a funny story of basically not being able to get labels approved with the committee and Rob throwing Orgeat on a LSD tabbed label and somehow getting through. So that's our bottle. But Orgeat is a wine that honestly they didn't think was going to sell a ton of, and it's very quickly become a very popular wine with us. At its root, it's a Ramato wine, right? A copper wine of Italy. For those of you not familiar with that, the easiest way to relate that to is a category of an orange wine, right?
Hmm.
Orange wines being made in the old world for a very long time, Slovenia making some of the world's best, in my opinion. But in America, we are starting to hop on that trend.
Hmm.
And honestly, I blame the hipster movement. I blame the triple IPA kombucha drinkers
Oh, okay.
that we've just been pushing into this just funky world as far as drinks go, right? We
Hmm.
just want things that like make us question whether we like it or not. So,
Okay.
um,
So that's what Orgeat does for you.
yeah, you know what? Not actually. I actually really enjoy Orgeat. So I relate most orange wines as the triple IPAs of the wine world, right? They get funky. We can go into this Brettanomyces barnyard, like just wet cardboard funk. Not to say that it's not a market for it, that people don't drink it, but your average wine drinker is not looking for something that funky. Orgeat came about as kind of a dare of, hey, can we make an orange wine with purpose, one with some finesse and some execution. And so, with the Ramato style, Pinot Gris is our grape, and only about a third of it is getting skin contact, right? And again, for those of you who don't know, the easiest way to remember it, orange wines are the opposite of rosés, right? Or rosé, we're taking a red grape and making it like we'd make a white wine. And with an orange wine, we're taking a white grape and making it like we would make a red wine. And our biggest difference there is skin contact, right? That skin giving us a little bigger body and some tannins. And so with the Ramato style, about a third of it, given the vintage, is getting skin contact. A little bit of it is getting some neutral oak. And what we end up with is a Pinot Gris with some backbone, right? And this one, for me, I love it with tiki masala, a dish that people don't automatically think of a wine pairing for, but a killer one with some food with a little bit more backbone, right? I really enjoy Orgeat.
I'm going to buy some of that next time I'm buying wine.
Yeah,
I'm definitely
absolutely.
going to buy some of that. So let's move on to Pinot Noir because like you said earlier, I think a lot of people when they think of Robert Sinskey, they think of Pinot Noir. So you have I guess there's three single vineyard Pinot Noirs that you sell, that you make, three Amigos, Kappa Vineyard, and four vineyards. So tell me about those, and specifically, what are the differences between those three?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking about six Pinots in a given year there. 36 individual blocks of Pinot Noir. Jeff is such a gifted winemaker, and one of the things that he does is we keep our blocks separated during fermentation, right? So we're only blending after the fact so that each area can really keep its own character. And so our Los Carneros Pinot Noir is going to be the one we're making the most of. It has
Hmm.
grapes from all 36 of those blocks. And so, really, just a great overview of Carneros, especially for people who haven't had a lot of wine from that region. Land from the Sonoma side, all the way to the base of Mount Veeder, all the way down toward the San Pablo Bay. You're talking about a very large span of land with a lot of different terroir and aspects to it. So,
Hmm.
Los Carneros is just a great entryway into our Pinot program and a stepping stone Pinot Noir. It's typically going to be the lightest of any of our Pinot Noirs, just because we have grapes coming from all those blocks. But a killer one. We'd move into Three Amigos, which is going to be the first lots that Dr. Sinskey purchased when he was retiring. Those are our southernmost vineyards, located all the way down toward the San Pablo Bay. So that bay really mediates the temperature. We're seeing really nice acid buildup down there. And Three Amigos, given the year, we're starting to move into a darker fruit point. But for me, usually comes out a little more herby in the background. due to the local herbs that are growing in the Carneros. Four vineyards any given year tends to be my favorite. That refers to the four vineyards on the Napa side of Los Carneros. So we're taking out our Sonoma vineyard. In our current release in the 2016, it is just, it's my Pinot person's Pinot, right? We're going into a much darker red fruit, dark cherry, finishing out in this foresty black tea note that just really speaks to my Pinot drinkers. But it's a fun exercise right now in the tasting room. We have our 17 Los Carneros next to our four vineyards, and 17, a drastically different growing year than 16, right? It was a hard year. Obviously, the fires, as bad as they were, we were talking about severe drought and heat. And so while 17 is a lighter fruit note, it is a sharper wine because of the concentration happening from that drought year, while the 16 is a much darker expression of red fruit while being softer on the palate because 16 was a very easy growing year. So really cool highlight in between it. And then you go to our singles, right? The Vandal Vineyard, which is right there at the base of Mount Veeder, the warmest of the vineyards. The Kappa Vineyards, where Rob and Maria live currently, coming from that estate. And then Aries Pinot Noir, which we only make on years that Jeff tastes or sees something different from those grapes, right? Instead of trying to force them into a box that they don't fit, we just release a limited production of their own expressions. So, six Pinots, six very different Pinots. If any of you guys have the chance to come up and taste with us, you'll see, there's some wineries in the valley that do, 6, 9, 11 different of the same grape. And more times than not, I come out of it and I go, man, after about 3, they all kind of tasted the same, right? And with our Pinots, they are all drastically different from each other and purposed in their flavor profile. So come up and see us. Let's try some Pinot Noir.
All right. So you gave me a list of wines that you recommended that we would talk about, and I selected the Cabernet Franc only because it's one of my favorite varietals, and I like to see the differences between the wineries and how they come out. And this one is very light. Is that kind of by design? So tell me about this one.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Cab Franc is going to be a father grape to Cab Sav, right? That's where the Cab is coming from in Cab Sav. And so the grape itself, a much thinner skinned grape than Cab Sav. In the old world, Lower Valley is making some fantastic ones. It really thrives in that region, but it is brushed off on the side as a blending grape for the most part, right? And now in this era that we're in, we're seeing more and more people give it attention and the time of day that it deserves. Cab Franc moves into this darker red note, but because of that thinner skin, tends to be less tannic than Cab Sav. But it also moves into more of a bell pepper and green pepper note due to chemical compounds found in it being the same ones found in bell peppers and jalapenos and of the sort. And so for me, I've always been a lover of Cab Franc. Cab Franc for me is a bigger red skin grape for Pinot lovers, right?
Okay.
But
yeah.
you're right, because with Pinot Noir, we're talking about thinner skin grapes. We're talking about grapes that, for me, are more expressive of where they're grown and how they're grown. And so Cab Franc, for me, is a great way to get into a darker, much darker red fruit profile without getting heavy, without getting blown out. And so the one that you're drinking right now, our 2016, 100% Cab Franc this year. For us, again, it's all about creating a wine that is a representation of the area. And so sometimes that means you need 5%, Cab Sav blended in the bottom of it. But for the 2016 year, it meant, hey, Cab Franc can speak for itself. And a beautiful wine, a young wine for us. Crazy to say that a 6-year-old wine would be young, but we release our wines a lot later than most in the valley. Man, the 2016 right now is showing so much youth. In the past 2 months that we've had it released, it's changed so much in the bottle, right? The first time I opened it when we released it, it moved much more into a green olive note in the finish. but now, I mean, you're drinking it now. Would not say green olive now. It is much more your traditional Cab Franc
Mm-hmm.
and a beautiful grape. And Pinot Blanc, also a grape that you don't see in the Valley a lot. Another grape like Cab Franc that was a blending grape. I love that Sinskey has picked some of these grapes and given them some of the best land available and so much time, care, and love because you get to see what these grapes can be when they're given the chance.
So there's two more I really want to talk about. One of them is the
Yeah, absolutely.
Cabernet, the SLD estate, which you clarified for me earlier was for Stag's Leap District. So just tell me about that. What's so great about that wine and what makes it so special?
Yeah, so our current release right now is 2016. We do have a small amount of the 2017, like I said, but not even guaranteed that it'll get released. We might just keep it for history's sake. But in 2016, we're talking about 30-year-old vines on the property. Old vine wine is not something that we see a ton of in Napa. Not to say you can't find it, but 90% of the wineries aren't making wine from 30 plus year old vines. And I've always explained it like people, right? Old vines are like old people. The older we get, the less we work, but the more stories we have to tell, right? And so our grapes are producing, or our vines are producing significantly less grape than they would if they were 6, 7, 8, 9 year old vines. But those grapes themselves are so complex. They're so deep and they have so many stories to tell from their time there. The 2016 SLD is a super special wine for me. Not only is it one of the last vintages that we're going to have for a while, but 2016, like I've said previously, was a really nice growing year, right? We had this, I always described it as an oasis in a sea of drought. From 2011 to 2017, we battled in and out of harsh drought and heat. And in 2016, we got a break. And so not only do you have old vines in 2016, but you have a wine that's not complicated because of heat, that's not concentrated because of drought, that is just grape and that is just super complex, rich, textured grape because of old vines.
Mm-hmm. And I was going to ask you, since you brought that up, the old vines, is that the reason that wineries will replant is because the older vines don't produce as much?
Yeah, absolutely. And it depends on the size of your winery and your market, but this comes back down to basic economics. If I am producing 60 to 80% less wine in the same amount of land, that cost per unit is going up, right? And if you're not a winery that has the clientele and the members that are willing to spend $200, $300, $400 on a bottle of wine, then we got to pull those vines up and plant something that we can lower that cost point down a little bit.
I see. Okay. All right. So the last wine is a Pinot Gris late harvest. Is it? It says late. Does that mean late harvest?
Yep.
All right. And late harvest, and I know it's not everybody's favorite. People kind of frown on them because they're kind of sweet and that kind of stuff. But I like everything, and so I really like late harvest. So can you tell me about this late harvest?
It's nice to have someone else who isn't scared of a little sugar in wine. Now, don't get me wrong, guys. Sugar can be done in a bad way, right?
Sure,
If we're adding a lot of sugar to wine, that is a bad way to do it. But if we're talking about late harvest sugar, if we're talking about sugar due to maturity in grape, it can be a beautiful thing. This late harvest Pinot Gris is just that. It's a Pinot Gris that's gone longer into the season, and so those sugars are building up, right? We think about it just like a strawberry or any other fruit. You pick it up early in the season and it's still tart. We pick it later in the season and it's much sweeter. And the trick is getting it in that point that it hasn't become jammy, right? We still want some distinction. We still want some acid. We still want some clarity in what we're tasting. But because we're picking it later, close to a 27 on the bricks, 27 and a half, we're getting some residual sugar in that wine. It's something that's beautiful. And, it's funny to see how wine trends go, right? We're in a stage of wine right now where any sugar is gonna make you fat, kill you, right? I need the
Sure.
driest
Yeah.
red, the driest white. One of the wines that I fell in love with and that I say is still one of my favorite wines to this day is Madeira, right?
Yeah.
Madeira coming out of Spain, Portugal, largely known as the unkillable wine due to basically being pasteurized. A little history for you guys. Madeira used to be the most popular wine in the United States. After our forefathers signed the Declaration of Independence, they toasted with Madeira. But as time
Interesting.
goes on, you ask your average wine drinker if they even know what Madeira is, and you get crickets, right? And so it's fun to see how wine trends go. I think we're getting into a place where people are more accepting of some sweeter wines, and they have their
Sure.
place, especially when it
Yeah.
comes to food pairings and some of our dessert dishes. But for example, do you know 1970s, 1980s what the most planted grape was in Napa?
Do I know that? I do not know
Yeah,
that. I don't know the answer. So what is it?
it was Riesling. Sweet wines used to be all like America was, I mean, we loved our sweet wines. Now we think of Chardonnay, we think of Cab, right? People weren't drinking Chardonnay in the 70s. Like, I didn't even know what it was. Like, and so
Hmm.
just to say in the past 50 years, the past 40 years, we've made such a jump from, I mean, even looking back in, the 90s and these big, heavy oaked, buttery Chardonnays. Not to say they don't still exist and they don't have their place, but we're moving more toward this crisp, bright, more fruit forward driven expressions of white than we are toward these heavy malolactic and heavy oaked whites. So yeah, it's just fun to see how trends change, how people change. But at the end of the day, it's what makes wine special. It's what makes it cool. Is that it's always changing, right? Next year, there's going to be a whole lot more wine to try.
So I'm going to ask you two more questions. I always thought for me, I would be good in a tasting room. Just the environment, just being able to talk wine with people and drink, share wine and all that stuff. I actually went to an interview for a tasting room job at one point. I didn't get the job, unfortunately, but I always thought I would be good at that because of my passion for wine and like you were saying earlier. So what is the one thing that you like most about working in the tasting room and working with customers?
Man, for me, I'm a people person. I love people. I've always said two of my favorite things in the world are people and food. And so for me, it's meeting people from New York, from Michigan, from Norway, from wherever it might be, because everyone's got a different story. Everyone has a different purpose for being here, and kind of tailing back to what I said at the beginning. Those people in 5, 10 years aren't going to remember the exact tasting profile and what year that wine was, or maybe not even what the wine was to begin with, but they're going to remember the experience. They're going to remember the conversation. And for me, it's just connecting with another human being for a moment in time, maybe learning something that we didn't know, and drinking some good wine together.
All right. So the last thing is, as far as what you drink, besides Robert Sinskey wines, which I'm sure you get your share of, what else do you like? And when you work in the industry, everybody talks about, hey, go to do some industry tastings at certain wineries, and I know there's discounts involved and all that stuff. But what are some of the places that you like to go?
Man, there's a lot. So as far as Pinot goes, I'm a huge Sonoma Coast guy, right? So outside of Sinskey, I love the coast. Four of the people that I kind of consider the grand cruise of Sonoma Coast would be you have Small Vines, Radio Coteau, which they actually share the same drive, so go out and see them. You got Nick and Andy's at Pays, some amazing stuff coming out of their vineyards. And then you have Wayfair, right, which is Chloe Paulmeyer's project, and much bigger wines coming out of there, but man, so much intentionality and making something that's reflective of their area. So I love those guys, Sonoma Coast. Go see them. As far as Napa goes, the Mathiasons have shared our heart for a very long time. Jill Mathiason, probably one of the sweetest ladies I've ever met, and another winery that really makes wine from the heart and not so much the check at the end of the day. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Scribe, mention Pride Mountain, also some killer guys out there. And you have Arteza, you have Faya. You know what? I've always been an advocator that there's a wine out there for you, right? Might not be my
Sure.
wine personally, right?
Sure.
Might not be what I like on my palate, but there's a wine out there for you. And that's really the culture that we live in today, which is honestly amazing. Yeah, I always explain old wine culture as much more of a bully culture, right? It really was much more of a you should like this wine. you shouldn't like this wine. You're dumb for liking that. You're dumb for not liking this. To the point where my parents' generation and even my grandparents, they have a lot of hard beliefs on wine. But if I were to put 10 wines in front of them blind, and they say, "Oh, I don't drink Merlot," and I give them 10 Merlots, they'll like 6 of them. Right?
Yeah.
Because for the most part they were told what they should like and what they shouldn't like. But our generation now, the culture of sommeliers now is much more of an education point. My job is to help you know why you like this wine, and not to tell you why you should like it or why you shouldn't. Just to help you know why you like it if you do, right? Example, my grandmother, she's been drinking Woodbridge for like 45 years. And, she used to tell me she felt bad drinking around me. But, I told her, I was like, hey, if the best tasting thing in the world to you is $9 a Magnum, I was like,
Sure.
pound it.
Yeah.
That's awesome, right? Because at the end of the day, another thing I've been an advocate about is that we're multi-dimensional people, right? We can enjoy a tiered list of things in my life. I've always used the example of, you can go to French Laundry and you can eat a $500 dinner and it's amazing and just so intentional. And you can go and enjoy a $3 burger at In-N-Out, right?
Sure. Yeah,
Like
definitely.
we have room in our life for both things. And so if you feel like it, go see the guys that I mentioned. Tell them Sinskey sends you with love. But at the end of the day, don't let anyone try to bully you or tell you what you should or shouldn't like, right? There's something out there for everyone. There's a reason they make as much Woodbridge as they do. People are drinking it, right?
Oh, yeah,
And
absolutely.
hey, $9 a Magnum, drink a lot of it, guys. Right?
Yeah, and it's a pretty amazing place, actually. I've been to Woodbridge, and I got to see the whole production and everything. It's absolutely fascinating. So, from a wine person who likes that kind of stuff, it's actually a really cool place to go.
Absolutely. And as far as finding wineries in the valley, for me on a personal note, I'm always looking for people whose current story is just as cool as how they started. Because you'll find in the valley, every single winery here, guys, has an amazing story. Every single one of them. But some of them, their current story is not as cool as how they started, right? And so for me, just on a personal note, I'm trying to find those guys who, man, what they're doing today is just as cool as what they did when they started.
Like you guys are doing over at Sinskey, right?
Absolutely. And we're doing the same things we did when we started.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Jamie. This was awesome. I really appreciate your time. And next time I'm in the area, in the Napa area, I'm going to come by Sinskey. Hopefully you'll be there and you can educate me about some of the wines we didn't talk about tonight. So,
Hey, I'm holding you to it. I'll see you when you're up here.
all right. Well, take care. Thank you so much, Jamie. Have a good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jamie, for taking the time to share your great story with us tonight. It's obvious you have a passion for wine and food, and thank you for providing the food pairings that we can enjoy with our Robert Sinskey wines. I'll never forget my initial experience at Robert Sinskey Vineyards, and I look forward to trying some of these great wines that we discussed that I haven't had. Next time you're in Napa, make sure to make an appointment at Robert Sinskey Vineyards and do a tasting with Jamie. I will put a link to the Robert Sinskey Vineyards website in the show notes so you can purchase some of their wines for yourself or make an appointment to visit. Finally, I encourage you to visit the show website at www.obsessedwithwine.net to listen to past episodes, read tasting notes from wines recommended by the guests, and to sign up for the mailing list so you can take advantage of bonus episodes I'll be releasing in the future. You can also join the Obsessed with Wine podcast discussion group on Facebook to interact with me and other fans of the show. Thank you, and I will see you next week. Cheers!